what differentiates the kind of new generation of ASRS systems is that any inventory can now travel to any operator. And what that allows you to do is have every single SKU in your facility available at the same point. And so that would be as if you perfectly arranged your items so that when the picker needed to walk down the aisle, position 1 has the first thing they need, position 2 has the second thing they need, position 3 has the third thing they need.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our #1 priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. When it comes to automated storage and retrieval systems, also known as ASRS, there are several choices available. You have regular ASRS systems that will require changes to your facility and processes as they are designed to be more of the conveyor belts. Mobile ASRS, on the other hand, don't have to travel in a fixed path. Instead, they can travel to a predetermined location or work center inside a facility. Mobile ASRS systems are also very flexible in accommodating real-time demand and changing picking operations as the demand changes. In today's episode, we have our guest, Jon Schechter, who discusses how mobile ASRS systems differ from regular ones. He also touches on the rigidity of the regular ASRS systems and why they would not be suitable when the demand may fluctuate significantly. Finally, he describes the technology behind mobile ASRS systems in simple terms that will help you assess if they could be fit for your facility. Let me introduce Jon to you. Jon Schechter started with AutoStore in July 2020 and is responsible for driving market awareness focused on e-com, retail, and healthcare. He partners with customers in their fulfillment journey to identify whether AutoStore is right for them. Jon has been designing robotic-based fulfillment centers since 2008 with prior experience with Kiva Systems, Amazon, and Right-Hand Robotics. Jon studied mechanical engineering at MIT and holds an MBA from Harvard Business School. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey, Jon, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sam. Glad to be here.
Okay, amazing. And I am super excited to have you as well, just because the kind of expertise you bring from the warehouse and especially the newer technologies such as mobile ASRS, I think it's going to be so beneficial for our listeners. Just to kick things off, do you want to start with your personal story and your current focus, Jon?
Yes. Thanks, Sam. I've worked within warehouses and helped deploy mobile robots for my whole career since graduating from college. So I, at this point, deploy thousands of different mobile robotic systems to bring to bear on a variety of fulfillment and distribution challenges. And I've done that in the U.S. and in Europe, and really helped to help folks grow either through building new capacity or by transforming their existing physical business systems, right? The fulfillment centers, distribution centers that deliver the products that their companies make.
Amazing. Love it. So I think it's going to be fairly exciting to dig into all of those stories in terms of, what really works in the field, what does not work. Our goal is really to educate our listeners so they can take advantage of these technologies. So before we do that, we have one of the standard questions that we ask every single guest on, and that is going to be your perspective on business growth.
Absolutely. I think Tim talked about this a little bit when he was on to talk about ASRS, but I really think that, a healthy sign of a business is growing. And where I'm working with folks typically is, how do they grow their that physical part of their business, right? Their customers are demanding more. They're having success in creating products and manufacturing those products. And how do they effectively get those to customers and grow that product offering? There's always more SKUs or more items that need to be available. And I think the other side of growth that I'm seeing is an increasing service level requirement to serve your customers faster, when they want it, how they want it. And whether that's in e-commerce or healthcare or in other industries, everyone's being pushed to cut down on the lead time from when a customer clicks order to when that item is in their hands. And a lot of the work that I do is helping people grow in that dimension, in that kind of increasing service level in this new normal of click it on my phone and the item's in my hand. Whether I'm a doctor, an end user, or a manufacturer, I'm expecting that high service level now.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, thanks for the mention for Tim Harrison. He's an amazing guy, and I love him so much just because the kind of insights he offers, it's just brilliant. And and as you mentioned, we had done the regular ASRS episode with him. But today we are going to take a different twist in this episode, and we are going to cover this more from the mobile perspective, and we are going to dig into that. But I wanted to address a couple of points that you just mentioned. One of the things is overall expectation of the lead time from the e-commerce perspective, especially with COVID. Now the expectations are changing from the consumer perspective, and they are expecting the faster delivery of goods. So whoever can really deliver them faster is probably going to have the competitive advantage. And all of these ASRS systems, including mobile, I think they play a huge role overall in providing that operational efficiency. So let's say if somebody is evaluating the regular ASRS versus the mobile ASRS, what is going to be your advice or the selection criteria when they are looking at these different systems, and which are going to be the situations where your regular ASRS are going to be fit versus the mobile?
Great question. So the mobile ASRS or robot-based ASRSs are going to lend themselves to environments that require a bit more flexibility, and where the demand is a little bit less certain, where the facility itself is actually a little bit less ready for automation. Let's say like it's an existing facility that's a brownfield facility, or you're in an environment with a non-traditional real estate where you don't have a certain very tall building or a process flow that just doesn't lend itself to a kind of standard design. And so some of the newer systems, the mobile ASRS type of systems that I work within, end up being able to fit themselves into unique real estate and can also deal with changes in the throughput demands in a more flexible way, and kind of serve that more ad hoc operation. Whereas let's say things like a VLM or a traditional shuttle system, like some of the things Tim Harrison talked about, are really good if you have a kind of a known order profile and a known building design where you can fit that taller ASRS within it. Those can be really great tools. And so typically a mobile ASRS, things like AutoStore where I work, or Adabotics, or some of these several other providers, are able to fit themselves into an existing site and really deal with that uncertainty of demand of what's coming, and allow you to scale up a little bit faster and change as your business changes over time.
Okay, amazing. So I think, we need to dig into detail in a lot of different aspects that you mentioned, because our listeners may not be familiar with these things if they have never had, let's say, any of the ASRS or robotics in their warehouse facilities, right? So let's say if we talk about the flexibility and the demand being uncertain overall in the facility. So give us an example of some of the product types or the industries where you feel that the demand is going to be uncertain. So maybe provide a couple of examples overall where the flexibility is going to be needed, where demand is going to be less uncertain.
Yeah. So if I start, let's say in the healthcare sector, what the type of service level and requirements that are coming there are every day, hospitals and surgery centers put in their order for the next day, and they're literally fulfilling what's needed for a surgeon overnight. And so then the demand input to that, say, a customer like Medline or pharmacy distributor like McKesson is kind of ad hoc, right? That demand is being generated just the day before, so very short cycle times, and the hospital can order anything in the catalog, and it's always a growing number of items, both within this healthcare example, but really every industry that I work with, and therefore that demand input is not known in advance. You can plan to a certain capacity, and you can put some guardrails in place to ensure that you won't overwhelm your operations. But at the end of the day, you want to serve those customers, and therefore that flexibility is really important to be able to best serve it on that ad hoc demand creation basis.
Okay, so healthcare is a very good example overall, and a lot of that may be coming right now just because of the disruptions in the market. I don't know if this is going to be a norm or it is just exception just because of the COVID situation. So let's compare this with the traditional manufacturing and distribution, and I am actually going to provide some examples from my side as well. So let's say if I look at some of the FMCG industries, for the most part, they are going to pre-plan everything. For the most part, they are probably not going to require as much flexibility, even if they may be replenishing more in the just-in-time fashion. And the majority of the FMCG, I don't think they actually do a lot of just-in-time, right? Let's talk about some of the industrial manufacturing sectors. Even in the industrial manufacturing sector, the demand is not going to be as challenging because they have some sort of predictable capacity, and based on which they need to really plan. So what are some of the sectors that you have seen in the manufacturing and distribution? Healthcare is a great example. I completely agree and appreciate that. But in the manufacturing, distribution, retail, do you have any patches from the micro vertical perspective or the sub industry perspective where you have seen similar challenges?
Yes. So I'll give you one really good example in the manufacturing space. So you're right that, traditionally that was, planned out over long periods and kind of consistent demand. But what's happened, let's just say in automotive manufacturing, is now the sales, dealerships and the ordering of cars is now much more customized. There's thousands of permutations for a given vehicle, and you just changing things like trim packages, colors, maybe special side view mirrors. All of those items need to then come together in, just in sequence, and not even just in time, literally sequence on the line, so that when the manufacturing tech turns around to grab the next side view mirrors, the exact mirror that was ordered for that car is available to them. It's not a palette of one style of mirror now. It's actually one of several different SKUs that a customer could order. And so I think that's like one example of really the same kind of change that's happening in the manufacturing sector, where there's more SKUs, there's more customer input on what goes into their product in that environment. And therefore the fulfillment challenge for those environments is growing, is at the piece level, is at that really deep level of customization.
Yeah, so amazing example, and I'm actually going to try to connect the dots here so that I am able to understand and my listeners are able to follow as well. So in this automotive example, and I am actually trying to think more from the warehouse perspective where ASRS is going to be relevant in this value chain. So let's say if we take the example of custom manufacturing, and the example that you provided is more of the custom manufacturing scenario where let's say if the automobile is going to have some sort of trim change based on the customer expectation, and that is actually going to drive the changes in the whole supply chain. So now my suppliers are probably going to have this challenge that they need to reconfigure their BOMs, they need to reconfigure their fulfillment cycle as well. So where do you see ASRS being fit in this specific situation? Obviously, it's not going to be relevant with dealerships because they are actually trying to sell the cars, and I don't think mobile ASRS can really take the car from point A to point B. I think they are designed more for the smaller goods, the smaller parts, right? So do you see this more relevant in terms of these industrial distributors who may be supplying to the car manufacturing value chain?
In between, somewhere within the supply chain, in between where, say, the mirrors are manufactured and the mirrors are put on the car, there is this distribution or fulfillment challenge Sometimes it's delivered by the manufacturer that holds all the inventory and delivers just in sequence exactly the unit that's needed at the line side. But typically, at least in the automotive space, and I'm sure it applies in some of the other manufacturing, micro verticals, as you said, sometimes the manufacturer will own that fulfillment and, do their own picking to feed their lines and feed the line side. So, but whether it's owned by the, say, tier 3 supplier or some 3PL in between, or the end customer, somebody has to create those just in sequence orders that are dependent on what the end customer at the dealership has decided they want on their car in this example.
Okay, love it, and love those examples, to be honest. So let's dig slightly deeper overall from the technical aspect of the problem. So obviously the flexibility of these mobile ASRS systems is super relevant, that if you have this just-in-time scenario where your demand is going to be super moving, then you need something that can accommodate that. So talk about the technical aspect of why mobile ASRS are capable of accommodating these scenarios, while your regular ASRS are going to fall short overall in meeting the expectations in these scenarios.
Yeah, fundamentally, an ASRS in general is going to make the inventory storage much denser, and it really eliminate all of the walking that people filling those orders we talked about before are having to do in the first place. So you'll get that in any ASRS. You get those benefits that the inventory is stacked up more densely, using more of the air within the facility, and that the people are no longer walking. I think on top of that, what differentiates, the kind of new generation of ASRS systems is one fundamental thing, which is that any inventory can now travel to any operator. And what that allows you to do is have every single SKU in your facility available at the same point. And so that would be as if you perfectly arranged your items so that when the picker needed to walk down the aisle, position 1 has the first thing they need, position 2 has the second thing they need, position 3 has the third thing they need. And so in a virtual way, that's what a new ASRS can do. A traditional ASRS might be able to almost do that, except that they're going to have an aisle, and anything in that aisle can be delivered to a workstation. And then that order might need to actually travel to another aisle of the ASRS to get the other items. Some traditional ASRS has fixed this with a conveyor routing network outside of the aisles of storage, but that eats up space. It causes another element in the flow that could break down or could have its own capacity constraints. And so the newer ASRSs are really have fewer single points of failure and a little bit more flexibility for that delivery of any item to any operator. Just in general, the reliability, when you've reduced the number of moving pieces, goes up substantially. I mean, if you take 3 subsystems, like a typical automated storage and retrieval system might have the in-aisle movement of items, an elevator or a lift that actually takes the items vertically up and down from the aisles. And then there's a third component, like the loop that I just described, where the items are riding on conveyance. Whereas something like an auto store or an out-of-box type of system, or even a mobile AMR like a Kiva system, where I spent the early part of my career, those have, one robot goes and retrieves one container of inventory and delivers that to a station on its own. So you have a lot more contained kind of motion, fewer moving parts, and therefore less risk that the whole system were to stop at one point.
Okay, so I am actually going to again translate this a bit overall for my own personal understanding, also for our listeners, if they might not be as familiar with the ASRS. So my understanding of, and I'm actually going to narrate my understanding of the regular ASRS is going to be, it's more of going to be some sort of, conveyor belt that I see on the airport, where your workstations need to be fixed, and then inventory is coming to you if you are, let's say, operating in that specific workstation. Now, mobile ASRS is going to be slightly more mobile robots, where they can reach to any of the operators. I think you mentioned that comment as well, right? During your description.
Yes.
So can you touch a little bit more on how these mobile ASRS operate? Are they going by the geo? Do they know the operator? Do operators have some sort of tags that they are following? Can you talk about the technical aspect of how the movement is happening on the warehouse?
For sure. There's a really wide range of mobile robot types. I'll talk about kind of two flavors. One is kind of contained within its own storage system, and in that case, the robots travel on a grid and or within rails of some kind, and the orchestration of like where robots go, which robot handles which inventory, is done by central control software. And that control software is, obviously connected to warehouse management software or the ERP, and is being given directions about, these are the orders that need to be fulfilled, and also these are the operators available at the workstations. And then the control system within the ASRS is managing that flow and saying, okay, these are the orders that need to get done. I'm going to task the robot fleet that I have to go get those the inventory that serves those orders. And then the movement itself is typically handled at the low level. So the individual robot can navigate its way along the grid. And so it's given, a destination. I need to go get a certain bin of inventory. And then the robot drives over there with its own sensors on the grid to navigate amongst the other robots, right? This is a fleet of dozens or hundreds of robots working in the same space. And so they can communicate and evaluate their own travel to get that job done.
Okay, so let me again break it down for our listeners. So I am actually going to provide some real world examples here, the way I am understanding this. So let's say if we compare the regular ASRS, that's going to be slightly more fixed system, the way, rails work or the trains work. And the mobile ASRS is going to be slightly more free flowing system, like a bus, where they can go to many different addresses in the real world. Now, you are talking about the grid. So the bus is going to have some sort of grid underneath. So these buses can communicate with each other. But then buses are actually trying to get to a destination, right? So how do the robot or a bus in this example is going to recognize which operator do they need to go to? Does the operator actually carry some sort of receiver of the signal that they can recognize, and these guys have some sort of addresses that, okay, hey, I'm a robot and I need to go to this address. So can you describe that a bit more?
Yeah, so in the contained kind of ASRS or mobile ASRS family, yes, like each person is sort of like at a bus stop in your sort of analogy, which I like. And so the buses are traveling in, say, a private network of roads just for the buses or the robots. And then each person is stationed at a position that is known to the robots. That's where that inventory needs to go, and I will deliver it to that location, a physical location that's fixed. In the other flavor of mobile ASRS, there can be a slightly more ad hoc locations. And so in those instances, there's still a position within the facility that is known that the robots need to go to deliver, let's say, same thing, it's delivering inventory with multiple robots lining up to serve that operator. And there's kind of another class of mobile ASRS that are actually like leading the people to where they need to go. And in those cases, a person is assigned to a robot. And so they stay co-located. As the robot travels, the person actually goes with them to the inventory. It's like a slightly different flavor of this, but in that example, let's say the operator is almost riding the bus, to use your analogy. And so you have those kinds of differences in sort of contained, uncontained, and let's say the person going with the robot in more of a collaborative way.
Okay, so let me again build on this. So let's say in the fixed system where you had the fixed rail and the traditional ASRS system is going to have just a belt. So obviously you cannot move your operators around. You don't have that flexibility. But in this specific case, each of the operator is going to have some sort of address or the grid on which they are standing, and they always need to have that. And then your robots actually have some sort of grid as well. And the robots can communicate with each other. Robot can also communicate with these operators. So the flexibility aspect that you are trying to describe in your mobile ASRS, number one, you can move those operators if you want to, but they are still communicating with the operator that is standing in a specific position. I don't know if they are always going to be fixed or they can be moving if they like. I know that you touched on the other one as well, where the robot is actually co-located with the person and then the person can move. But let's say in the other example where, let's say, if the person actually has some sort of address that robot is actually able to communicate, can they move or do they need to be fixed in a position?
The locations are flexible
Okay.
on a, on a planning standpoint. You wouldn't move the workstation on a daily basis, but you
Okay.
can actually, when designing, let's say a modern or mobile ASRS system, you can put the workstations anywhere that you would like to. And where the advantage of that over, say, a traditional ASRS, where the workstation has to be at the end of an aisle, you
Yeah.
can actually put a workstation underneath an ASRS. You can put them at the right location where, let's say, receiving is happening. You can put a put away station right next to receiving and have the
Okay.
robots drive over there. And so there's a lot more layout flexibility, not on like a daily basis that you would relocate these stations, but you can choose the location in planning your facility in a much more flexible manner so it can match better the flow of inventory.
Okay, so let me understand this. And one of the comments that you had made in your pre-show is that typically the regular ASRS require some sort of process change, and I don't even understand what that process change means. But how I am going to interpret this based on how you described how mobile ASRS function is, let's say if I have the existing warehouse and I am the executive of the warehouse. Now, if I want to do the regular ASRS, then what I need to do is I need to move the entire warehouse, okay? Because I need to create the space for the giant conveyor belt that you are going to install, and then I need to relocate my workstation. Now, that's a huge expenditure for me if I need to retool my warehouse the way my warehouse is working at this point of time. But in case of mobile warehouse, the flexibility that you are describing is, you know what, if I have the warehouse, my zones can stay as it is. I don't have to move as much. Overall, from the warehouse perspective, I simply need to identify the right spots where I can have these workstations set up, and then I can create this network so that my ASRS can move around in my facility without changing the layout of my warehouse. Am I accurate in that description?
Yes, exactly. I think that this new generation better serves businesses that have existing pain points and don't want to change facilities, don't want to custom build.
Okay.
They can certainly build a greenfield site that has, something like an auto store in it, but you can also retrofit. I mean, more than 60% of the projects that I do are retrofits within an existing operation. And one of the reasons for that is that you can start small, so you can
Yeah.
build a starter system, and you can easily grow it as you make space. So let's say in your example, you've got an existing facility, it's full, and the reason
Yeah.
I need help is because it's full and I'm outgrowing my space. By just creating a small bit more space, let's say off peak, or by temporarily densing up the existing space, you just need to create enough of an area to start the construction of a new ASRS. Then when you start moving inventory into it, you are gradually creating more space to be able to expand and fill into. And so you can more easily transition into the automation within an existing plant.
Okay, interesting. So I actually want to go back to the overall comments about that flexible demand that you were mentioning, and that's a huge topic overall. I mean, everybody would like to figure out, how I don't have to plan, but I can still fulfill. Like the biggest challenge that any distribution company or the manufacturing company for that matter is going to face is to accurately predict the demand. That is always a challenge for any distributor or retailer. And you are telling me that you can solve that because now you are going to have this flexible demand. So let's say if my customers are going to phone me tomorrow that I need 4 of these boxes, I don't have to restructure my facility. I don't have to restructure my processes. I can accommodate that in much flexible manner. So can you describe, so I now understand, how this communication works overall, how the layout is going to work for the mobile from the mobile ASRS perspective. But how is that going to help me in demand fulfillment more in the GIT fashion? Can you touch a little bit more colors there?
Yeah, sure. I think years ago in a warehouse facility, it was very common to do what's called slotting, right? And
Okay.
slotting is basically an analysis of my inventory and where it should be located, which
Yeah.
areas that inventory should be located in, And, we'll try to put the fast movers close to the shipping area. We'll put the slow movers up high in the racks or far away. So there's, to try to optimize the walking paths.
Yeah.
And that worked for a long time. But I think in the stage we're in now, again, with SKU proliferation in a number of industries and with just a much more complex demand profile, it's not possible to plan that way anymore. And so, what good ASRS systems do, and especially the mobile ASRS type, are able to absorb that complexity into the system. And so that the inventory that you need tomorrow is not yet known, but it's in my ASRS system. And so if a customer decides they want that SKU, it's not going to break my operation because all of the demand shifted suddenly to the to the slow moving area to that I slotted incorrectly now, and that's one of the things that the ASRS can absorb in terms of operating complexity and sort of alleviate that burden from an operations team, and then the same thing being on this sort of hyper demand shift that we're seeing, right? This instantaneous SLA. That similarly, there's not a loss if your order profile shifts. There's not an efficiency loss, and so that you'll end up without enough staff or enough cycle time to get the orders done. And so these new systems can really help you deliver that inventory to the order in a much shorter period. I've seen examples actually from click to deliver of 79 seconds, where the bin happened to be on the top and close to a workstation, but the e-commerce company was able to deliver, that's say a record. So that's as fast as it's going to get, a minute and a half.
Yeah.
But it's typical for folks to have 5 to 15 minute cycle times from the time in which the order is placed into the facility to being available to ship out. And that's a huge advantage when you're thinking about the competition online, especially of cutoff times. What time do I need to order in order to receive my items? And just the value of that is really tremendous. And so a traditional method where you're picking and sorting and packing and going through multiple flows can cost you that cycle time. Maybe 2 hours would be pretty good in a manual environment. And one of these ASRS systems can help you cut that cycle time down to 15 to 30 minutes typically.
Okay, so I am completely sold on the benefits of this, right? I mean, there's no question about that, but I'm still trying to connect the dots overall. Let's say if I have my physical layout and all of a sudden I have this instantaneous demand that I am getting from my customers. So obviously these goods are not necessarily located in the warehouse just yet, right? They are going to be somewhere. So now system needs to know where these goods are going to be so that they can pick the goods as opposed to changing the configuration as you would at, let's say, if you were doing this in the traditional warehouse. So let's say if I am trying to understand the process from the end-to-end process, how this is the retooling of the system is going to work. So let's say if customer sends me an order tomorrow, and now I need to fulfill that demand in, let's say, 79 seconds. So what is happening from the system perspective? My WMS is actually getting the order that, you need to pick from this specific location, but that specific location may not have the material. So can you describe the flow, how the flow is going to work overall from the process perspective when the system is going to detect that, no, I mean, you don't have to retool. I already know that I can accommodate this demand in much more flexible manner. So can you touch a little bit more there, how this is happening?
Yeah. What's interesting that not everybody realizes, either ordering in a B2B context or online, is when you click order, you're actually injecting that order pretty directly through the ERP, through the warehouse management software, directly into the fulfillment process. And so the best systems that I've seen have that connection already in place. And in fact, all the way back up to the website where that ordering is happening, you're showing the inventory availability, the true inventory availability that, you would like a pair of, size 11 blue sneakers. We actually have that pair of sneakers on a shelf ready for you, or in a system ready for you. And therefore the promise that's on that website is based on a known fulfillment, capability. And so when it's linked that tightly, you can offer a really strong customer experience. I think back to your question though, of like when to recognize if I have an operation that I maybe am missing this opportunity is to think about whether your business system already has that strong connection from the inventory, location and availability, and sort of the ability to predict all the way up to the external facing customer view of that, what the possible service level is. If that's not in place, that's a good place to start, is to think about whether I have a really strong awareness of my potential cycle time, and so much so that I so accurately that I can promise that to my customers at the forefront of the order process. And then maybe getting into it. So let's say that the customer does click order, whether or not they saw that promise in advance. Then what happens is, okay, there's an ERP that is looking at, okay, there's an order now for size 11 blue shoes. Then it's making some network allocation that says, okay, we have those shoes in a couple of locations. Where should we fulfill this order based on the customer? And so it assigns it to a building. Now, when it's within that given building, the warehouse management software is prioritizing based on the shipping method or the customer promise time and a few other factors to actually get that order filled. And in a manual environment, again, you can look at what is the possible cycle time that facility offers, what are the costs of that fulfillment, and evaluate that relative to, say, a new modernized system where it would have a shorter cycle time and a lower cost to fill, and sort of look at those two things and decide whether the current system is sufficient for the business at hand. In some ways, there's an ROI on increasing the cutoff time, as I was talking about before. That's a little bit harder to it's a little less tangible in a way, because, for example, if you were to increase the service level by an hour, instead of making me order my blue shoes by 5 p.m. to get it tomorrow, you let me order till 6 p.m., 7 p.m., 8 p.m. It starts to be a slightly complex analysis to say, well, how much will that help my business grow? But I think the answer we're seeing play out in the marketplace is it should grow a lot. Your customers will shift over to you because they can get it from you tomorrow. They don't go to another channel or one of your competitors. And so we know that there's a strong correlation between very high service level offerings and actually capturing that volume. And I'm speaking somewhat to, say, the e-commerce context, but I think that's true in the B2B context, in the industrial parts, you name it, in other industries, grocery especially. I think, there's this notion of quick commerce now, which is essentially a convenience store that delivers to you in 15 to 30 minutes. And I think, naturally, like, one of the natural laws of fulfillment that I see is that, like, service levels will always get shorter, SKU offerings will always get wider. And so some of the tools that we're talking about here today help deliver on that, those fundamental challenges that, the service levels increase and SKUs always grow.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, in the next 5 years, the kind of, changes we are going to experience in overall in the customer expectations in terms of the speed of the products or the instant gratification that customers are going to expect, it's going to change dramatically. But I want to make sure, I am summarizing this more from the process perspective so that our listeners are comfortable in understanding the benefits that mobile ASRS are actually going to bring to the table. So my understanding so far, based on how you described, is if I have, let's say, the fixed ASRS system. So what is going to happen with the fixed ASRS system? You need to have a very fixed system. You need to have fairly predictable demand, and that's how your fixed ASRS system is going to work. But let's say if I have the completely manual facility, and a lot of SMB warehouses are going to be fairly manual, so they don't really come across these scenarios because they are not going to have very connected, let's say, the ERP or WMS system, and everything is going to be manual. Now, one of the beauty of keeping things manual is going to be your human bodies can make fairly complex decisions on their own. And let's say if you have these challenges, such as your just-in-demand scenario where your demand is spiking, now this person can go and walk around your warehouse all day and find the product, right? So some of these manual facilities are not going to face that challenge. So the mobile ASRS is sort of trying to cross that bridge in between, that you don't have that rigidity of your fixed ASRS system, but then you have that flexibility of that human being that were able to make these complex decisions in time whenever you needed that flexibility. These mobile ASRS, what they can do is they can accommodate these changes as they are happening from the demand perspective. Am I fair in that assessment?
Yes, I think that's right. And at the end of the day, a very manual facility with just stuff on shelves and people is very flexible. It's probably the most flexible thing you can do, except that it will break down at a certain scale. And when we talk about labor flexibility, there's still constraints there, right? It takes time to hire and ramp up new employees. If that demand all hits on short notice, you can't bring everyone in, extra folks into work. So it has its own limitations. And then certainly at the level of complexity that we're talking about today, even more people doesn't get you more output. It starts to certainly diminishing returns, and systems help to kind of enforce that. The physical fulfillment systems we're talking about help to enforce those SLAs without, while being able to deliver it at a very high throughput or very large site. So maybe I was in a facility earlier this week that they have about 500 SKUs and they're very manual. They're even operating today without a warehouse management software, but that works for them because because at that level of throughput, they have a small team that's very efficient that can get it done. If they were to try to double or quadruple that business, they would start to feel some of that pain from a manual environment where they could scale up their team by 4x, but those same people won't be able to memorize where all the SKUs are located, how they fulfill orders efficiently, and the cycle times will start to grow. So I think, it's not as if every operation should be automated at this point, but as the complexity grows and you'll reach this tipping point where all the metrics that you're tracking within your operations start to look worse and understand why. And I think there's this sort of exponential complexity as you get more SKUs and you have this tighter demand.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, there is no way to grow a facility or a business just purely through manual operations. If that was possible, then every company out there in the world would be manual right now. And by the way, on that note, if people believe that they can grow using manual approach, then probably they are wasting their time listening to this show. So, from the show's perspective, obviously, see, technology has its value. Manual operations also have their own value. Technology is never going to be as competent as the manual decision making, the kind of complex decisions that humans can make. Honestly speaking, I mean, our technology and system, they are going to take long time to replace that. But at the same time, manual operations come with a lot of frills. Okay, you are never going to be able to scale. So it's amazing that at least the mobile ASRS are able to at least provide closer experience, is how I like to define, in coming closer to humans, what humans can possibly do. And this is probably a way of combining, either utilizing some of those co-located robots, the way you explained, or maybe some of the mobile ASRS. This is amazing. So overall, I think, we are pretty good right now, Jon, for this episode. So I wanted to check if you had any last minute closing thoughts or advice.
Yeah, I think in terms of advice, I would add that, for folks that haven't looked at some of the automation options for their facilities in a few years, definitely worth another look. I think it's come a long way, and how well it can be connected to existing warehouse management software and how powerful a tool it can be in a variety of industries. I think people should take another look, especially, post-pandemic, rethinking about their labor force and the requirements on the business. Now is a good time to be sort of looking ahead to where a business is growing and how automation like our mobile ASRS can help on that journey.
Yeah, and my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be, especially if I look at my manufacturing community, they are typically focused on the product itself. They are very rarely thinking from the process perspective, but you have equal capabilities available either from the product side or from the process side, and you can build significant competitive advantage that is going to help you today in serving your customers, and also that is going to help you in the future when you are ready to sell your SMB business to your your buyers. So thinking this from the process perspective is going to be significantly beneficial. On that note, John, I really want to thank you for your time. This has been a powerful episode.
Thank you, Sam. It was a pleasure to be with you today.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Jon, head over to autostoresystem.com. It's AUTOSTORESYSTEM.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Tim Harrison, who discusses various ASRS systems and why they are essential to increase the productivity of a warehouse. Also, the interview with Chuck Coxhead from Presensus, who discusses warehouse mobility trends in the enterprise and SMB markets. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.